welcome back to Breaking the Cycle of Gang Violence. This is episode 3. If you haven't checked out our first 2 episodes, definitely do that. Joe is going to start us off today by talking a little bit about our guest today.
Today we're going to speak with Stephanie Fierros. Stephanie Fierros is a longtime Delano resident. Unfortunately, her life and her family were struck with tragedy on August 19, 2018, when her son, Michael Duarte, 25 years old, was shot multiple times in front of his residence. Unfortunately, Michael Duarte succumbed from his injuries at the Delano Regional Medical Center, and today we're going to discuss that with her.
All right, Joe, thanks. And Stephanie, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it and being willing to share your story. If you wouldn't mind kind of just talking and going back to the day that your son passed, and please feel free to take your time.
So the day before we had spent with my son, we spent an awesome day with his sons playing football in Bakersfield, and it was just an awesome day. Well, Sunday, my son had been at home. He lived with my mom at the time. We were all at my sister's house swimming all day. Normally passing by my mom's house, if we had seen my son, I would make my husband stop. But for whatever reason, and only God knows, for whatever reason, I didn't look that way. My son was outside. And my husband had seen him. And he decided he needed to just go straight home because he had to go to the restroom and do all that stuff. We had a very long day. And when we got home, our dogs got out. I had a husky at the time and a Shih Tzu. And the dogs got out. And my husky doesn't know how to be around other dogs, so all I can hear were the neighbors' dogs wailing, crying. I thought they were getting attacked. So my husband said, "Get the keys, meet me in the alley." And meet me in the alley. So I did just that. I got the keys, and as soon as I got out of the house, I just screamed out, "Jesus, I need your help." And I'm crying, and I'm like, "Steph, that was a little extreme." Mm-hmm. It's just a dog. We got the dogs, and I had cried out to Jesus that I needed his help, and I thought, wow, that was a little extreme, Steph. And we got the dogs in the house, and my husband was on the phone, and he goes, "Baby," he goes, "you can go inside the house." And I normally don't talk to him like this, but I looked at him, and I yelled at him, saying, "No, I'm not going anywhere." And I'm like, what is going on with me? Well, he got the phone call that something happened to my son, and it turns out that when I had been screaming out to Jesus that I needed his help, the shots were going out, so I couldn't hear the gunshots because we live so close. There were 7 gunshots. And immediately we went to the hospital here in Delano. And we couldn't identify him. And it was already in the paper that Michael Duarte had been, a gang member, had been shot. And we weren't told yet. And after a few hours waiting there, it must have been 6, 7, 8 hours, I don't know. Delano PD wanted me to leave the scene and come and get questioned, and there was no way I was leaving the hospital. So here we are. Mm-hmm. I didn't get to see his body till about 2 weeks later, the day of. But we got to see his body finally and identify him.
And is that because it was part of a crime that
Yes.
they had to keep it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So for those who don't know, and Corporal correct me if I'm wrong, it's because of evidentiary purposes that you guys have to do a process.
Yeah, so when we're dispatched out to a scene, we definitely have to secure the scene just in case there is anything of evidence that we can use in order to determine who committed the crime.
Okay. And that obviously, as a mom, that doesn't really matter at that point. You just want to see your son. I can understand that. So I want to talk a little bit about, so that happened, and he was 25, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So very young. He's very young. So the process after that, I mean, I know you mentioned specifically that the paper had not only listed that he was the one who was killed, but that he was a gang member. Can you kind of talk about that, other than the fact that you had just lost a son? He's also being identified a certain way. And we'll get into the history of that. But having that initially, right after your son was killed, can you kind of talk about that perspective?
I was very angry, very angry. He was labeled as a gang member, but I know the whole truth of the situation. He didn't choose that lifestyle for himself.
And I think that will be an important thing that parents should hear about this. So if you want to go back and kind of start with him as a child and going into high school and those sorts of things, can you give us some perspective as to who he was, what he was into, what sort of things he did, and kind of how it started to shift?
Yes. My son, he was a drum player. He played the drums since he could pick up a stick. And he used to use the Tupperware and beat on the walls as a bass. And it sounded really good. We never had to stop him. Well, it's just something he did very well. And he played with the best of them. We would go and minister at Teen Challenge many times. I used to go to First Assembly here in Delano. I was worship leader, and, there with my son with me. And that's something he loved. He loved to do. And but he also had a love for cars. And he was going to Cesar Chavez. And his grades weren't so great. He would do his homework and never turn it in. I would see him do it. He wouldn't turn it in. He wouldn't put his name on it. And it's like, Michael, what are you doing? And he just got behind in school. So
Why do you think that was? Why do you think he would do it but not turn it in or put his name on it?
I still wonder. I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. He was a smart kid, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't know.
Okay.
He did get behind in his school credits. So the decision to send him to Valley Continuation School was presented to us. And they said, he'll get his credits back and, he can graduate, come back with his class. Well, that never happened because he went to Valley and he learned a love for cars, and he started learning how to steal cars and run from the police. And so when he was about 15 or 16, my ex-husband and we decided to take a plea for him that he was going to be labeled as a gang member. They said, oh, no, it would come off of his record. He was still a minor. It would come off his record.
How old was he at this time?
15, I believe. I believe he was 15. So we thought that was a lifestyle that he was just, we thought it was just a little phase. And, we took the plea that he was a gang member. And that guilt sits with me. When he was 16, he was having his first child. My son loved fast things. He played the drums fast. He loved roller coasters. Mm-hmm. He loved the thrill.
Mm-hmm. So he initially was taking a plea that was for stealing cars?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you believe that stemmed from the people he was exposed to at the continuation school? Okay.
Yes, most definitely.
Was there any signs of that prior to when his grades were slipping? Was there any new friends or things like that that had started to make you wonder if there was something else going on
Oh, yeah.
prior to continuation? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that would be important for parents to identify potentially early on.
He went through that sagging his pants deal, and he liked the graffiti, the art of it. But I did notice that, just other people that I have never seen, started showing up. And then dealing with having a baby at an early age. I mean, he wasn't a bad kid. He wasn't a bad kid.
So after continuation school, or during continuation school is what I should say, how did things start to change? Did they accelerate? Was there more trouble? What sort of things for parents, like what's tangible that they can see or recognize? What did you see and recognize maybe now in hindsight?
We did our very best as parents, raising them up in the ways of the Lord and correcting them. But at the same time, too, it kind of pushed him away. And, your kids get scared. He wouldn't come home for days at a time sometimes.
Do you know where he was?
He would say the Momo, the hotels.
And so when you're in that sort of situation, what goes through your mind? What did you do, and what do you think other parents could do if they're dealing with something similar right now?
I spent a lot of my time praying.
Did you feel like it was too far out of grasp at that point to be able to really pull him back in?
Yeah,
You did.
that only God can do it.
Okay. So for parents who are feeling like that, maybe they're going through something like that right now, is there anything you would have done differently or anything you would recommend that they maybe try to do differently?
I wouldn't have sent my son to continuation. I wouldn't have taken a plea.
Okay. And why are those two decisions so poignant for you, or why do you feel so much guilt about those?
Because it exposed him to that lifestyle. It exposed him. And maybe it could have been different if we would have just pushed through it and said, no, you're going to stay at Cesar Chavez and you're going to,
So even if maybe he had to repeat a year
Yeah.
there, you would prefer it be there?
Definitely.
Okay. Now, moving forward, once he turned 18, you said that decision with the plea deal ended up following him. Can you talk about that from your perspective and why you feel like it followed him?
when he turned 17, they were chasing him, I think, from Bakersfield. I heard the police, the vehicles, the sirens, like every law enforcement that you can hear from Bakersfield. They were all chasing this vehicle. I live by the cemetery here in Delano, and that's kind of where I heard the helicopter. And the helicopter started going towards County Line in Browning. And I thought, well, maybe it isn't my son. And then the helicopter started coming back towards back into Delano area. And I thought, no, it's my son. And sure enough, he was apprehended. And I thank God that there was a lot of people out there, because the cops could have did some damage. They had K9, they had it all. And they called me right away and said, Stephanie Duarte at the time, is your son Michael Duarte? We have him in custody. And I said, yeah, that's him. And I'm just thankful that there was a lot of people out there. I kind of feel like that saved him. Mm-hmm. And he turned 18 immediately after, and the gang member label stayed with him.
And when you say it stayed with him, did it stay with him on documentation, or did it stay with him, for lack of a better word, on the streets to other gang members that he was affiliated?
Documentation.
On documentation. Mm-hmm. Okay. So then if he got in trouble again, it was automatically connected.
Yeah.
Okay.
definitely.
And did he get in trouble after he was 18?
Yeah, well, he did 4 years.
Okay.
And actually, he was at Wasco for a little bit, and then he got transferred to Arizona. And he spent the rest of his time in Arizona, and which was a very good thing for him because I don't think there was all that politics with the whole gang lifestyle. But he got his GED. I got to see him graduate, and he was doing really good for himself. Going through training and, getting courses, doing all these, things to help better him. And he was excited. He was excited and really looking forward to coming home. But it was a long 4 years.
Yeah. And so he starts to make changes within the system,
Yeah.
right? And then I assume he gets out and that's when he comes home?
Yes.
And then how long was it after that?
There was an incident. My son, he protected everything that he loved. And unfortunately, there was an incident with my daughter. Things are good now in her relationship, but at the time, they weren't so good. And my son had said, "Hey, Mom," not at that time, but he told me after the fact. There was an incident that occurred where the boyfriend of my daughter was belligerent. And there was a lot of violence going on. And I had to rip the baby away from him because he was drunk. And I guess the homies, the so-called homies that my son knew of, they were passing by. They were ready to take him out. And meaning they were ready to do some damage to the boyfriend. And Michael took it in his hands and said no. He knew that if it was them that did it, that he wouldn't have been here still, So he had a gun. And he knew he wasn't going to use it, but it was either him or his friends that were going to do it. And somehow or another, the gun, got into the boyfriend's hands, and then the mom of the boyfriend. I mean, it was just bad. And he ended up having to do some more time because of that.
Okay. And so how old is he at that point?
I believe 23, I believe.
Okay.
22, 23.
Okay. So he goes back to do more time. And then how long was he in that time?
He was going to do 5 years, I believe, but he only did 2.5, I think.
Okay.
I think it was 2.5 because of the Prop 57. He was out, for non-violent, I think.
Yes. Okay.
So he ended up getting out early.
Okay. And so then he came home, and what was it like after that?
He came home. It was actually 6 months before his death.
I really want to talk, though, about, because I want people to have tangible things that they can take away, things that you saw, things that you did or didn't do that worked or didn't work. What do you think parents need to be aware of? Parents of children and teenagers and parents of adult children.
I think talking to your children helps. I mean, yes, there's correction and there's a rod and everything else, but love, it covers a multitude of sins. And just, I know in the last days that I spent with him, just loving on him was the best thing that I could have ever done, and continue to pray for him every day. We talked about everything, we didn't always see eye to eye, but I mean, that's my son. And we were always very truthful. If he felt a certain way, he was very truthful right back. But, having that communication with your kids is very vital.
Do you think you did enough of that when he was younger, or do you think you could have done more and that could have changed things?
I think I could have done more. I think I could have done more in his younger years. I think I could have did things a little different.
What specifically, if another parent is listening to this?
Our kids, they're always going through things. I mean, kids getting bullied left and right, and the parents not knowing anything about it. But, I mean, I was always a friend to my kids. Not first, but I had that relationship with my kids. But I think I could have done it.
Do you think that was
more
detrimental at all?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay. So you think you could have taken more of, I don't know if disciplinarian is the right word, but more of a parent rather than a friend? Do you think that would have been more beneficial?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This is what I want parents to know. This is what we want them to take away from this. Why do you think that was difficult for you to do?
I love their life right along with mine. I mean, I didn't think things were that bad. I mean, I always wanted them to be open with me because I know me as a child, I didn't have that. I have great parents,
Right.
but I never had that open lines of communication that I did with mine. So I always kept things in.
Stephanie, real quick, were you aware of gangs, like before, like growing up or anything like that?
I don't know.
So if there were signs while you were going through it, do you think you would have caught them at that point, or is it looking back now that you see the signs?
It's looking back now that I saw the signs because, I mean, you just think, oh, it's just a little face. You know, they're wearing the little saggy pants or, you know.
So it was the clothing. It was some friends that popped up. What else was it?
I know he had been dabbling into drugs.
Do you know what kind?
No,
Okay.
no. I think there was one time, looking back now, I think there was one time he was probably having an overdose and I thought he was just sick.
And so was this all happening rapidly? Was this happening within, what was the time frame? Weeks, months, year? For when you started seeing the saggy pants, the friends coming around, potential drugs? Or what did it, how quick did that
It
evolve?
was very quick.
Was.
I mean, when he didn't even finish the continuation school, before he went into state prison, he was doing time at Crossroads. He's always been in the system pretty much.
Do you think that was detrimental?
Yes.
So for people who are outsiders who say, well, what are we supposed to do? If they're getting into trouble and we've tried talking to them, we've tried, maybe suspension from school, et cetera, what do you think could have made a difference? What do you think could have been done differently to potentially pull him out of that cycle?
It all started when we made that decision for him to go to Valley. That's pretty much when it all started, because before then he was in sports, he was playing the drums.
Even though he had started with, some of the baggy clothes and some
That
of the
didn't
friends.
start until Valley.
Okay.
Yeah, that didn't start until.
There were some signs, though, I think with grade slipping that maybe now in retrospect probably was a little bit of a precursor. What were those signs? And do you think you could have stopped those prior to? Because you took the plea, obviously, because there was some incident that happened with stealing cars,
Yeah.
right? So that happened, but then you think it accelerated because of Valley. So I understand that, but there was obviously something going on beforehand. And that's, I think, where we're trying to get parents to catching it beforehand. So what was it, or what did you see, or what could have been done differently, or what do you think could be done differently instead of just putting them into a system, so to speak?
I think if I would have taken more time to, make him work, to get those grades up, not been so slack. Well, let's just send you to Valley and, you'll get your grades. You'll graduate with your class, maybe then.
Okay.
Been more firm on that.
What was the home life like growing up? What did that household look like prior to any of that?
it was a house of love. We grew them up in church.
And it was a two-parent household?
Yeah. My ex-husband, he was in the military. So he spent a lot of time away, always deploying every 6 months. We were in 29 Palms for 7 years. And so we got married at a very early age. We were 18 right after high school. We got married, we had Michael, then we had my daughter. And so we were all growing up together, all making, we were all just growing up together because we were very young.
But other than that, it was a two-parent.
Yeah.
Did you work too
Yes.
at the time? So
I was on
two
and
parents
off
both were
little
working. Okay.
little jobs. He's working with the state now, as so am I.
And the reason I was asking is because we've interviewed a former gang member, and he said he came from a single parent household. His mom worked a lot, but that wasn't the stereotypical thing, is what I'm trying to get at. Your household was different. You were young, but it was different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of love. I mean, we always had family events. Our family was very tight.
It sounds like from what you're explaining, some of his best qualities that you feel, his protection and his willing to do whatever he can for the people he loves, were also his faults.
Yeah.
So if somebody has a family member like that or a child like that, how do we shift that direction so they don't get involved into gangs and don't go to an extreme?
My son was very stubborn. He was a Taurus. He was a bull. So he had his mindset.
So do you think he was just so in his own mindset that from your perspective, you individually, there was really nothing else you could do other than pray, which I heard you say multiple times is what you were doing desperately, it sounds like. Is there anything that you look back on other than the continuation school and the plea deal that you feel like maybe I could have tried this, or could have taken this one in particular situation and done something differently?
There was also something that I think I needed to address, which was my trust in law enforcement, that I think played a big part in his death. A few weeks before he had passed, what are the protocols to when someone is picked up?
When someone is arrested?
Arrested, yes.
Okay. How old is he at this time?
He 25.
Okay, 25. Usually what happens, we'll arrest them, we'll bring them here, we'll take their photograph, we'll do what's called the probable cause declaration. As soon as we're done with that, then he gets transported, depending on it's a misdemeanor or felony. If it's a felony, he gets transported to a central receiving facility in Bakersfield.
Okay. Now, what if he wasn't? What if he was innocent and you let him go? Would you have him get picked up here?
If he was, if we don't have enough to charge him, yeah. It depends. Usually we'll have somebody pick them up here, or we'll transport them back to where we picked them up from.
Okay. Just a couple weeks before he passed, there was a shooting down the street from my mom's house. And Michael was home that day. He was with my mom and dad and my daughter. Well, I guess there was a shooting down the street, and he got upset about that. So he got a phone call from one of his friends and one of his homies. And this guy tells him, meet me outside. So he goes in the car with him. And not even a block or two later, they were getting picked up. I think this person was involved in it. And when I came home, there was a few cop cars in the front of the house. It was like he was being made a spectacle out of. and he was in handcuffs. And then they released him in the front of the house. And I just thought, what's going on? If he's this known gang member, why are they releasing him like that? It just didn't look good. When I talked to my son after he was let go, he told me that he was going to be charged if he didn't tell the cops who did it. He was going to be spending the rest of his life in prison for something he didn't commit. What he shared was that, if you want to know who did the killing over there, just look at the video cameras. And I said, Michael, but that's their job. They're going to do that anyways. He goes, Mom, but you don't understand. He goes, now I'm considered a tyrant. And shortly after that, he died.
So you believe it was because of the incident that he was not related to, but because he was picked up,
Yeah, so
that you believe that led to his death ultimately?
Yeah.
Okay.
Throughout our experiences, I know since Chief Navarez has come in, things have been going awesome. I mean, things are turning around. Things are going good. But I really feel like there had been some bad cops. There's good people, there's bad people. There's good cops, there's bad cops. And personally, I had lost a job because a cop had labeled me as Michael Duarte's mom, and there was a stealing, and I ended up losing my job. And it took a lot for me to, if I didn't know who I was in Christ, that would have just devastated me. This whole killing with my son, me going through cancer and, all these things that I've gone through. If I didn't know who I was in Christ, I wouldn't be here today. And I just feel like I need to be his voice because I know good things are happening now with the PD, and I appreciate that. This has been really hard for me, but I just feel like I needed to be his voice. There was an incident where my daughter had come in because something had happened to her, and she came in for help. And she ended up getting apprehended because they didn't believe her because she was Michael Duarte's sister. And so our trust has been broken with the law, I work for the state. But as far as Delano PD, I know things are changing. I know things are in a better place. And you guys are really, doing what you need to do, taking out some weeds, But I think I can speak for a lot of people here in Delano. They don't trust the cops, from my experience.
Going back to that, do you feel like a lack of distrust with the local police department, no matter really where it is, that adds to a cycle of gang violence?
Yeah.
You do?
I do.
Okay. So you think there needs to be better trust between
Yes.
the police department and the community they serve?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So is there any other questions I didn't address that you have before I kind of circle back?
No, just real quick, like what type of things do you feel will build trust between the community? Or was that one of your questions?
No, please, yeah.
That can build trust between police and the community.
I don't know, but you guys are on the right path, whatever you're doing now.
Well, I do know you guys have been hosting like town halls, coffee with the cops. You guys have been trying to be, from what we've seen, at least from a news perspective, they've been more proactive getting out in the community and being visible other than just times where they're showing up for calls for service.
Yeah.
I think transparency has been huge for us, is just being open as far as what we're doing. Because I know in the past we've been like, oh, we're not going to talk about it, or we're not saying anything about that, or we're not going to talk about that case right now. But I feel that if we are telling people what's going on, what's happening, regardless of how hard it is, I think that builds the trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I kind of want to wrap up with, again, taking it back to the very baseline of how do we end this cycle of gang violence. Clearly, we see how affected you are and your life has been by, multiple things that have happened. I know for you, the guilt you carry comes from a couple decisions that were made when he was younger. So how or what advice do you want to give to other parents about the choices they make with how they handle their children if they are going into maybe a little bit of a slippery slope?
Don't be so quick to judge it, and just have that love and open communication with them, to not push them away.
I have a question that may be somewhat painful. Do you feel like you failed your son?
I did for a minute, but I couldn't. Before he had passed, like I said, we grew up in church, and my husband had to remind me of this because I was feeling a little down about it. And I don't know what your beliefs are or anything, but throughout my life, I knew that I cried out to God, and I knew that I was saved, and I knew I accepted Christ into my heart and received him as my personal Lord and Savior. But it didn't dawn on me until the last couple months with my son that I know I did it for myself, but did my kids do it for them? So I know ultimately that they were and are my first, they're my reason, they're, my everything. And there was one night where my son was picked up, and he kept calling me from Lerdo. And normally you only get one phone call, right? But for whatever reason, he kept calling me back. And anytime we hung up, I would just pray. And I just told him, son, it's time. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what your girlfriend thinks. It all boils down to your relationship with Christ. And because he wanted the change. He wanted the change. He was tired of, he said, excuse my language, his life going to crap, But he was actually on the right path. He had just got a new job. He was waiting for his schedule to come in. He was all excited, the night before he passed, because that Monday he was going to get his schedule, and he was all excited because he was going to have benefits for his boys, and something was finally looking up for him. And but unfortunately, things happened, and but that night in Lerdo, he did want to change his lifestyle, and I said, okay, say this prayer with me. Repeat after me. And he did, and he accepted Christ as his personal Lord and Savior. So I know he's in a better place. And he's not having to run and be in prison anymore. So he's free. So did I fail my son? No.
Thank you very much for sharing. I appreciate it.
That'll conclude episode 3. Again, the case of Michael Duarte remains open. There are no suspect information at this time. However, if you do have any information, please call the tip line at 661-721-3369. You can remain anonymous. All right, thank you.